This story will tell the life of a young man who was reincarnated as a nobleman named Albin Audrin. Starting from one morning at the Audrin family residence, a young master named Albin Audrin was accidentally splashed with tea by his maid. The maid on duty looked very worried, afraid, and felt guilty towards Albin, not only because of her actions, but also because of Albin's temperament, which was known by his servants. Albin just kept quiet, as if thinking about something, until he didn't respond to one of his maid's apologies. Albin instead muttered something. He seemed to realize who he was now. After spilling a cup of tea, Albin realized that he had been reincarnated as a villain in a novel. Albin Audrin is a noble young man who is only 15 years old, but in the future will experience destruction. He knows because he clearly remembers that the world he is currently entering is the setting of the world in a fantasy novel. The young man has now been reincarnated as Albin Audrin, who is the antagonist with the worst personality in the novel. Albin in the novel is a trash figure with 3 qualities: arrogance, insolence, and laziness, but Albin is also a person who is blessed with genius talent, even though he never makes more effort. Albin's figure as an antagonist is depicted with the physical form of a handsome young man, but with a very excessive body weight. Albin lost his parents at a very young age. This was a factor that led to his development of a highly deviant personality. If these attitudes and behaviors weren't immediately changed, Albin would soon face a future of ruin. The young man's devastation worsened when he entered academia, and the primary cause was his defeat in a duel against the novel's protagonist. Now a reincarnator who knew his fate in the novel, Albin didn't want to end up destroyed like the original Albin. From that day on, Albin resolved to change his lifestyle. He didn't want to end up miserable on the side of the road, waiting to die as in the novel. Albin, who had just spilled tea, immediately changed his clothes. Suddenly, there was a knock on his door, and the figure of Seabass Christian, Albin's servant, appeared. In the original novel, because Albin was very lazy, Seabass was the pillar of support for the Audrin family. That morning, Seabass rushed to Albin's room when he heard one of the servants had made a mistake. How shocked Seabass was when he entered the room and saw his young master changing his own clothes that day. Albin was shocked and felt like he had been caught red-handed. But a big question arose in his mind about how high Albin's level of laziness was, as just changing his own clothes made Seabass look so shocked. Albin spontaneously reasoned to Seabass that changing his own clothes would save time. Hearing his young master's words, Seabass immediately moved and even shed tears. It seemed too emotional, but it was natural because Seabass had accompanied Albin for so long. Albin then wanted to express his request to Seabass. The old butler was enthusiastic about what his young master wanted to ask Seabass. Seabass immediately froze when Albin said his desire to lose weight. Albin also added that because Seabass knew swordsmanship, he wanted Seabass to teach Albin about the art of swordsmanship. Seabass was no longer surprised, but his reaction was now more dominated by worry for Albin. Seabass was afraid that his young master had just bumped into something. In this case, Albin also had difficulty explaining to Seabass. The young man had only been splashed with tea, otherwise he was fine. The reason behind his change was that if he didn't change soon, there would be no future for him. Albin was confused about how he could convince Seabass until finally he thought of a good reason. Albin tried to calmly tell Seabass that if he didn't change, Albin would never be able to find a wife. Seabass was still shocked. Given Albin's current noble status, even if his rank wasn't particularly high, he would never be short of proposals. Albin couldn't deny it. He simply wanted Seabass to let him change. That day, Seabass moved Albin several times. The young man asked Seabass not to hold back when training him. Albin wanted to prove to everyone that he could change in 6 months. He would succeed in both his diet and his mastery of the sword. Hearing his young master's strong resolve, Seabass could only support him wholeheartedly. Seabass Christian promised to help Albin with all his might. Training began immediately. A week passed, and Albin seemed to tire quickly and had fallen many times. Seabass tirelessly asked if his young master was willing to give up, but Albin refused. Despite his swollen feet, trembling arms, and excruciating pain in his back, the young man managed to get back up. Seabass was also quite serious about teaching his young master the basics of swordplay. He wanted Albin to quickly become accustomed to it. Albin often suffered defeat. His body couldn't adjust to the speed of the attacks. Seabass was also very experienced, while Albin, even his body was still reluctant to move according to his imagination. Albin realized that he had indeed started learning quite late, and his timing and condition were poor. The young man began to think about slowing down his training and doing as much as he could. But Seabass suddenly said that the estimated time for Albin to lose weight to the ideal level with the current rhythm of sword training would probably take about 3 years. Although it sounded long, for Seabass, it was already a good achievement. Albin didn't think so. 3 years was too long for him. So even though his body was completely exhausted, he got up and asked Seabass to accompany him to train a little longer. Of course, Seabass was very happy. He was willing to accompany Albin whenever and wherever his young master wanted. Time passed without him realizing it. Albin had been training diligently and slowly, making significant improvements. One day, Seabass took Albin somewhere. Albin's condition seemed much better, even though he was still on a diet, and his weight seemed to have reached its ideal limit. There was a dungeon there. Albin had just learned that there was a dungeon in his area. Seabass explained that this dungeon had a lower risk than other dungeons. It only contained relatively weak monsters. Seabass handed Albin's sword to its owner. As the man who had taught Albin for approximately 3 months, Seabass believed his young master's skills had improved significantly, but they still needed to determine whether Albin could wield the sword correctly and efficiently in real combat. Seabass wanted to see the results of Albin's training. Albin now realized that the purpose of his invitation was to take a final test. They began their journey into the dungeon, and soon, Seabass spotted a monster that could be used as a target to test Albin's abilities. Seabass pointed out that a goblin was passing by. Goblins are low-level monsters that typically live in groups. The one they saw appeared to have separated from its group, making it a perfect target to test on Albin. Seabass wanted Albin to kill the goblin. Slowly but surely, Albin began to enter the ideal fighting range. Honestly, at first, Seabass had thought that his young master's enthusiasm would only last for about 3 days of sword training or a weight loss program. The old butler knew full well that there was no way the lazy Albin could consistently perform any action. However, in reality, Albin had managed to absorb everything Seabass had taught him at an incredible speed. The old butler now realized that there would never be a limit to a diligent genius. Seabass was so proud when he saw his young master could fight against goblins so agilely, applying the sword art he taught precisely and efficiently. The old servant even had a heart pounding when he witnessed Albin commit such a cruel murder without mercy on a goblin. With that, Seabass was even more convinced that Albin was a swordsman loved by the gods. Albin returned to Seabass with his face splashed with blood everywhere. Seeing his young master had become strong, Seabass was sure there was nothing more the old man could teach Albin. Albin was very happy with his graduation. Several months later, news arrived in the Audron family. Albin, upon hearing the news, immediately ran to Seabass to confirm the news. The news was that Albin had received a marriage proposal from a noblewoman. Albin was overjoyed to learn that he would be getting a wife. He felt proud, believing the proposal was due to his successful diet. Albin's joy was interrupted by Seabass's words. The news of the proposal was indeed true, but it couldn't be said to be entirely good news. The reason why it couldn't be said to be entirely good news was that the proposal came from the Barrow ducal family. Albin was shocked by the news and by the ducal Barrow family's proposal to the Audron family. The difference in status was too great, as Albin Audron was only a baron. Seabass hadn't had time to explain the details, but Albin suddenly remembered that in the original novel, the original Albin had indeed married a woman. Albin's wife in the novel was Letitia Barrow, a troubled girl whose engagement was broken off due to Letitia's misdeeds, leaving her with nowhere to go. Albin suddenly felt his efforts to change his lifestyle were in vain. No matter how hard he tried to change his fate, Albin still ended up the same as in the novel. The young man began to walk the path of destruction he had read about in the novel. Seabass reminded his young master that the girl Albin was going to marry seemed to have a personality that was quite difficult to deal with. Therefore, Seabass begged Albin to try his best. Even though Albin himself was quite lazy to do so, Albin wanted to avoid his engagement. He asked Seabass if he could refuse the proposal because no matter what he thought, the proposal from the Barrow family would only cause him headaches. Seabass didn't mind, but the consequence if Albin refused, the Barrow ducal family would become enemies of the Audron family. Much more troublesome, Albin had no choice but to accept the proposal. Seabass wanted his young master not to be discouraged immediately because if Albin accepted the proposal, they would be related to the Barrow-Ducal family. This meant that in terms of safety, they would be safe. Albin didn't think so. In the original novel, it was precisely because of Baron Audren's family's relationship with the Barrow-Ducal family that Albin suffered ruin. For the time being, Albin wanted to put that aside because he was more curious about what Letitia, his future wife, had actually done. Seabass, after gathering information from several circulating rumors, said that Letitia had apparently embezzled taxes from the family's assets and brought young men into the mansion. Not stopping there were rumors that Letitia was a very wasteful girl who even took the assets of her previous fiancé. Albin, who heard Seabass's explanation, was amazed at how crazy his future wife's behavior was. It seemed that his hard work to change his fate, even going on a diet in the past, was no longer meaningful. His efforts were in vain. Time passed, and finally the day arrived when Albin would meet his future wife in person. He was accompanied by Seabass, waiting in front to welcome Letitia's arrival. Albin was quite curious about what Letitia would really look like when she appeared before him. From one of the horse-drawn carriages that arrived, a very graceful and wise-looking girl got out. Albin was stunned, fascinated by the serenity that Letitia radiated. Albin realized that the girl looked very different from the one he had imagined in his mind, or perhaps the one who had arrived was indeed a different person. Albin began to be confused. Letitia introduced herself and greeted Albin and the servants, who welcomed Letitia's arrival. From then on, Letitia would live and be under the supervision of the Audren family. Seabass stepped forward, introducing himself and intending to fulfill his duty of guiding Letitia. They first wanted to coordinate with Letitia's personal maid, but she didn't have one. Letitia went ahead, asking to be shown where she could rest. Albin and Seabass were confused until Letitia confirmed that she had come to Baron Audren's residence alone, without anyone else. When alone with Seabass, Albin asked the old man's opinion of Letitia. His first words were, of course, complimenting Letitia's beautiful appearance, but there was something else Albin meant. Seabass tried to summarize his thoughts until he finally concluded that Letitia seemed strange to Seabass. Albin agreed with Seabass's opinion. He explained that, according to both of them, Letitia didn't seem like a young lady who could do bad things. Her behavior didn't seem to match the rumors circulating. Albin actually sensed an aura of wisdom from Letitia. That meant there was still something they didn't know. They then agreed. Albin asked Seabass to investigate Letitia without anyone knowing. Albin himself also intended to dig up information from Letitia directly, although honestly, the young man was reluctant to get involved in the Barrow family's problems. While they were in doubt, Seabass also felt relieved by the Letitia he saw. The old butler had previously truly believed that a girl would arrive who was so stupid that it was difficult for Albin to talk to her. But from what Seabass saw, Letitia seemed very educated. Seabass even thought there might be a match between Albin and Letitia. Maybe they would be a good couple. Hearing Seabass' opinion made Albin blush. Seabass even expressed his joy if that possibility really came true. The operation began. Albin tried to get closer to Letitia. The young man tried so hard to invite his girl to just chat, but unfortunately, Letitia just stayed silent, not even responding to Albin. Letitia even immediately returned to the room after the girl finished her dinner, even though at that time Albin was still trying to fight in front of Letitia. It had been 3 days since Albin was ignored by Letitia. Seabass thought maybe rumors of Albin's past had an effect, but lately his young master's reputation had improved. Albin just thought Letitia might be too wary of Albin. Albin remained determined and would not back down easily. Albin tried even harder to get close to Letitia. Albin chased her, but still never succeeded. The young man was defeated and almost desperate because he never managed to get Letitia ready to respond to him. Albin finally had only one way to do it. First, Albin came in front of Letitia's room and asked the girl to go out with him, but Letitia, who was reading a book in her room, still ignored Albin. Albin began to take a horse stance and was about to draw his sword. The young man smiled. He decided to play along like a villain. In an instant, the door was destroyed. The calm Letitia naturally lost her composure. The girl was shocked and couldn't believe what Albin had done. How could the young man destroy his own house? But Albin didn't care. The broken door could still be fixed. What Letitia was concerned about wasn't the broken door, but Albin's attitude of breaking into a woman's room without permission. Letitia called Albin shameless. Albin laughed and replied that Albin was indeed a bastard. Albin was willing to do anything, even breaking into a woman's room, if it could be used to achieve his goals. Letitia looked confused. What exactly was Albin trying to achieve that made him break into Letitia's room? Albin approached. Without further ado, the young man expressed his intention to ask Letitia out on a date. Albin managed to get Letitia out on a date with him, but even so, when communication was established, Letitia still gave curt and sarcastic responses. Albin was a little discouraged seeing Letitia still wary of him, but he also realized that he would be wary too if he had to face Albin Audrin. Albin didn't want to give up. That day, he had decided where to take Letitia. Albin invited Letitia to go further up the mountain road to see the beautiful scenery that Albin wanted to show her. Albin enjoyed the trip, but Letitia struggled with her dress and high heels. She told him about her predicament. She blamed him for not telling her where they were going beforehand. If he had told her, she might have prepared an outfit suitable for the mountain trail. Albin apologized for this, but also smiled, seeing an opportunity. Albin asked permission first, and then carried Letitia like a princess. Letitia was certainly surprised by the sudden movement. However, Albin thought it was the best choice to prevent his fiancée's ankle from spraining due to walking on the mountain path. Letitia could only surrender, but warned Albin not to mess around. Albin was also reluctant to do something that would end up being troublesome, but on the other hand, he thought that being able to carry his wife easily was actually quite enjoyable. Albin was grateful for having trained hard and thanked Sabes for teaching him. Letitia realized that Albin might not do anything strange, but the young man's thoughts could be all kinds of things. Albin changed the subject and asked Letitia to look in the direction he was pointing. They arrived at their destination, a place where they could see a truly beautiful view. Letitia was amazed by the expanse of scenery before her eyes. Albin looked satisfied. He explained that the place allowed them to see the entire territory of Audrin. Albin was eager to show Letitia the view because Audrin was the land they would guard together in the future. Letitia blushed. The girl fell silent upon hearing Albin's words. Letitia revealed that she thought Albin was very different from the rumors she had heard. Rumors said that Albin Audrin was an arrogant, petty villain who lacked manners. Albin added to Letitia's shortcomings. Albin was also known as a lazy person, according to rumors. The young man also corrected her by saying that Albin Audrin was not a petty villain, but a great villains. Hearing this, Letitia laughed amusedly. Letitia, smiling, denied that any villains would call himself a villains. Seeing Letitia's laughing facial expression made Albin fall for his future wife's charm. Letitia played in the waterfall pool, while Albin sat watching his girlfriend play and enjoy the cool atmosphere. Communication between the two seemed to have improved significantly, even exchanging jokes. At that time, Albin took advantage of the atmosphere to invite Letitia to introduce herself. They still didn't know each other, although Letitia wasn't interested, but Albin, on the other hand, was very eager to get to know her. Letitia hissed for a moment, but then reintroduced herself, along with information about her favorite foods and hobbies. Letitia liked playing with children, which Albin thought was a good hobby. Albin continued the introduction. As is known, he enjoys sword training but also enjoys relaxing. This statement was confusing. Letitia was unsure whether Albin was a diligent, hard-working person or a lazy person. Albin was also confused, but he thought he might be more inclined towards hard work because changing his former overweight self to become ideal certainly requires determination and hard work. Letitia agreed. She began to think about maybe imitating Albin, but the young man wanted her to stay that way. Their solemn atmosphere was suddenly shocked by the appearance of a killer bear. The monster was much larger than they were, but Albin remained calm and explained that the creature in front of them was a pest to the residents. Letitia looked panicked. She thought they had to flee immediately. Albin remained calm. Based on his observations, the killer bear was targeting Letitia. It was undeniable. Even according to Albin, his wife did look delicious and appetizing. Albin was able to cut off the killer bear's head in one slash. So calm without wasted movement. One thing Albin regretted was that his conversation with Letitia, which had started smoothly, was interrupted by the appearance of the killer bear. Albin immediately turned and asked Letitia if she was hurt. Letitia was shaking but tried to stay calm and laughed while answering that she was fine. Albin suddenly realized his mistake. It was the first time Letitia had seen a monster, so of course she would be afraid. Albin approached her. He placed his hand on hers, grateful that she was safe. This action made Letitia look down dejectedly. She asked why Albin was being so kind to her. Albin was confused as to why she asked such a question. The girl added that Albin was simply a victim of a political marriage. Letitia knew that Albin was actually forced. If that was the case, then Albin should have just taken the Barrow family's support and been free to ignore Letitia. Albin immediately answered, saying he wanted to be intimate with his beautiful wife. That was his formal reason. The real question was Albin's curiosity about Letitia. Honestly, what had Letitia done, and who had she angered? Letitia was stunned. The girl advised Albin that it would be better for the young man not to know or get involved. Albin felt reluctant because he thought he was already involved. For Letitia, Albin could still let go of his involvement. Letitia advised her future husband that if Albin wanted to protect the Audrin family, he should hate Letitia. Flashback to Letitia's past. Since the age of 5, the little girl had her life decided and even found a soulmate. Letitia's fiancé at the time was Duke Maro Bertori. As a young girl, Letitia was taught that she had to be a good wife. Letitia was curious about what her fiancé would be like. She believed him to be a good man, but in reality, Duke Maro was a foolish man who liked to waste money and play around with women. At that moment, Letitia came to talk to Maro about the disruption to the lives of the Bertori people due to the tax increase. Letitia was concerned, but Maro warned his fiancé that the Barrow family's liaison officer should not interfere in political affairs. Duke Moro's words deeply embarrassed Letitia. She was even laughed at by Moro's 2 courtesans in the room. Letitia then apologized and left. Outside, Letitia cried. From a young age, she had been taught that her precious fiancé was someone she should dedicate to her. However, when she saw the reality of the people's dire straits, Letitia acted recklessly. She used taxes from the Bertori people to help improve their conditions without anyone's knowledge. She thought it would be better to use her existing wealth than for Maro to spend the people's taxes on pleasure. Finally, 3 years later, Letitia's actions were revealed to the public. Her engagement was unilaterally broken off by Maro Bertori. Not only that, Maro even accused Letitia of squandering the Bertori family's assets and even embezzling regional taxes for personal pleasure. Letitia tried to defend herself, but Maro interrupted her, stating that a thief was still a thief. Immediately, Maro banished her from the Bertori ducal territory. This action earned him praise from his courtesans. Letitia knew who had caused her miserable fate. She realized she would miss the sight she had always dreamed of. She left the Bertori territory. For 6 months, Letitia had been living in her family home. Suddenly, an order came down for her to be re-engaged to Baron Audrin, who is Albin Audrin. Letitia had heard the bad rumors about Albin. Not only Letitia, but she was sure that no one else knew about the bad rumors about Albin Audrin. Letitia even considered her engagement to Albin a form of divine punishment. However, after spending some time with Albin, she learned that the rumors were false. In Letitia's eyes, Albin was a very kind man who always cared for her and even tried to trust her. However, precisely because of Albin's kindness, Letitia was reluctant to involve him in her problems. She was fed up with losing something precious and feeling disappointed. She was confused. She didn't know what to do. Meanwhile, Albin had received a report from Sabes that it appeared Letitia had been framed. Before Sabes could finish the report, Albin was already determined to eliminate the person who had caused Letitia's suffering. Sabes wanted to get the information straight first, as the matter could become very complicated. There were allegations that Letitia had taken the Bertori family's assets, a fact. While surprising and seemingly impossible, there was a reason behind the act. Sabes explained that Letitia's reason for embezzling local taxes was to protect neglected children suffering from poverty. Albin was quite pleased to hear that, as Letitia's hobby was playing with children. Sabes continued, explaining that the local taxes collected were used for investment and to improve the living standards of Bertori residents, alleviating poverty. Albin was increasingly disgusted with Maro. How could Maro act so cruelly and make Letitia clean up the mess he caused himself? Come to think of it, Letitia's actions toward Albin were also due to her apparent concern for his safety. Both Albin and Seabass had the same response regarding the facts they found. Albin, who was at the peak of his anger, asked Seabass to help him teach Maro, the villain who had trapped Letitia, about the true meaning of the word villains. Their revenge plan begins. While eating together, Albin told Letitia his plan. The young man had spread a rumor about himself to the public that said, in order to avenge Lady Letitia, Albin Audrey plans to take revenge on Morrow. Letitia was very surprised. She warned Albin to back off because he was worried that the young man would become a target for Duke Morrow. But Albin was very confident. At the same time, Alba had also spread another rumor that said Albin Audrey really hates and cannot get along with Letitia. Albin intends to get rid of Letitia secretly by bribing Duke Morrow as much as possible. Letitia began to be confused. How exactly did Albin plan to take advantage of the spread of two contradictory rumors? Albin smiled. The young man wanted to take advantage of those with evil intentions because rumors would be most effective on people like that. At the Bertori residence, Duke Morrow appears confused and doubtful of the contradictory rumors about Albin. Morrow receives an update on the rumors from a woman who always sticks with him. The woman says there are so many rumors circulating, but Duke Morrow believes in the rumors of a rift and incompatibility between Letitia and Albin. The reason for this idea is that Albin, based on Morrow's stock of knowledge, is the worst young man, while Letitia is a very stiff girl. In this case, Morrow even thinks that Albin's rumored desire to eliminate Letitia is true. Albin had suspected Morrow would think so, and was uneasy. But rumors were just rumors. They just needed one more step to perfect it. They needed more solid evidence, but Letitia was still reluctant to involve Audrey's family just for her own personal revenge. Albin politely denied that what they were doing wasn't solely for Letitia's revenge. Albin had learned the truth about Letitia's crimes. Hearing this, Letitia was very shocked. Albin could accept Letitia's crimes because her goal was for the people, not for the girl's personal pleasure. However, Letitia was a little down because what she had done was still a crime. Letitia wanted to know if Albin regretted knowing the truth about her, but the young man confidently said that, rather than regretting, Albin was truly grateful from the bottom of his heart. Albin had decided in his heart that he would protect her for the rest of his life. Albin was convinced that only she deserved to be his wife. With this, Albin was reluctant to let her go. Albin promised that he would never mistreat her even if the heavens were to split. Therefore, Albin would never be able to forgive Morrow and would make sure that Duke Morrow would receive retribution for everything that had made Letitia suffer. Letitia looked touched to hear Albin speak like a great villain. The young man did not deny it, and even revealed the fact that great villains tend to love their families very much. Their plan began to work. Letitia went to the Audrey region's food warehouse. There, Letitia went to meet Morrow, who came accompanied by his girl and bodyguards. Morrow came because of a letter sent by Letitia. The letter was filled with Letitia's complaints against Baron Audrey. Letitia said that she was fed up with all of Albin's bad behavior and felt no longer able to continue the engagement, let alone becoming Albin's wife. Letitia said that Albin was far worse than Morrow. Letitia did not forget to add that she was willing to apologize to Morrow. Therefore, she begged her ex-fiancé to help her and save Letitia from the Audrey family. At first, Morrow seemed very concerned and sympathetic about what Letitia was going through, but soon he laughed while welcoming Albin's appearance there. Letitia looked very surprised. Duke Morrow said that he had also exchanged messages with Albin. That was because there were so many rumors circulating about Letitia's relationship with Albin. When Morrow received a letter from Letitia, the young man assumed that the bad news about Albin and Letitia's relationship was true. Morrow seemed very satisfied seeing Letitia in such a desperate state. He said that Letitia had actually pulled the trigger that would destroy herself. Basically, Morrow really hated Letitia because the girl was a very serious figure and had no charm as a woman at all. However, because Letitia's family background was the Duke of Barrow, Morrow could only break off their engagement. But now it was different. Morrow felt that he had an ally who had been betrayed by Letitia. Albin awaited Morrow's order. Without hesitation, Morrow asked Albin to kill Letitia. Albin, who had been waiting for those words to come out of Morrow's mouth, immediately rushed towards Letitia. Seeing this, Morrow was a little confused, especially when Albin mentioned that the Bertori family's guards weren't that strong. The truth was revealed. It turned out that Letitia and Albin had been conspiring to deceive Morrow. Albin even praised Letitia's acting, which had successfully fooled Morrow. She seemed pleased and proud to have earned his praise. Morrow felt betrayed by Albin, but Albin took it seriously. After all, Morrow was the one who betrayed Letitia first. Therefore, Albin raised his sword and refused to forgive Morrow until he felt the same despair as Letitia. Morrow didn't care. It was quite surprising to see Albin colluding with Letitia, but it would be a betrayal that also fell into the category of a serious crime. Not only Morrow, but the girl he brought with him also underestimated Albin, especially Letitia. They were very sure that neither of them would be able to bear the consequences. However, both Albin and Letitia had actually planned this carefully. Even the consequences had been taken into account by both of them. Morrow looked hopeful. He was about to say that they needed to correct Albin's hierarchy, but Seabass suddenly appeared, accompanied by a man wearing an eye patch over his right eye. The man was Crayon, the highest honorary head of the Royal Knights. Crayon gave Morrow a stern reprimand. Although Morrow Bertori held a high rank in the kingdom, Morrow couldn't afford to act rashly towards Crayon. The reason Crayon was there was because he was invited by his friend, Seabass. The situation became interesting when Crayon heard that there was an order to kill the daughter of the Duke of Barrow's family. Morrow tried to deny it by saying it was just a ruse carried out by Albin Audrin. Seabass didn't stay silent and showed the letter that Duke Morrow had sent to his young master. In the letter, it was written that if Albin wanted to get rid of Letitia, he would be happy to do so. Unlike the contents of the letter Albin sent to Morrow, Albin had never once stated his desire to get rid of Letitia. With such evidence, everything was clear. Morrow was utterly defeated, completely cornered. Albin simply displayed a pleasant expression, while Letitia seemed amazed at how Albin could be so cruel, making Crayon hear the word kill from Morrow without leaving a single piece of evidence in his letter. Crayon ordered Morrow's immediate arrest. Left with no other options, Morrow challenged Albin to a duel to restore his honor. It was quite troublesome for Albin, but the young man also seemed pleased. In the duel, Albin was free to beat Morrow fairly. The duel had been agreed upon, and Crayon himself would even be the witness. Morrow intended to kill Albin, but there was one thing Albin wanted to ask before their duel began. The young man wanted to know if Duke Morrow still had any intention of apologizing to Letitia, because if there was even the slightest bit of regret in Duke Morrow's heart, Albin promised to give him some leniency. With his sky-high pride, Morrow naturally refused, even wanting to kill Albin. With that statement, Albin didn't need to hold back. The duel began, and Albin's first attack immediately injured Morrow's nose. Albin was quite confused about where Morrow's intention was. He said he wanted to kill Albin. Albin's words then managed to ignite his opponent's anger and made Morrow move erratically. Morrow was annoyed because none of his attacks managed to hit Albin. He thought fighting Albin would be easy because of rumors that Albin was a lazy person. However, in fact, not a single attack reached Albin. Of course, this was understandable because Albin had been training intensively for 6 months under Seabass's supervision. Albin told the battered Morrow that Letitia had always worked hard to keep his image intact. While Morrow was busy womanizing and causing misery for his people, Letitia was busy helping as many people as possible. Morrow, clearly in the wrong, still ignored her confidence. The commoners would continue to grow in number, even if left alone. However, if all nobles thought that way, then they were simply parasites on the people. They could not survive without the people's intervention. Letitia, aware of this, was willing to take great risks to save the Bertori land. However, Morrow trampled not only Letitia's feelings, but also all her efforts. Morrow still refused to admit his mistake. An annoyed Albin beat him, and the young man's final attack managed to sever one of Morrow's arms. Morrow screamed, despair starting to overwhelm him, but Albin refused to stop. He really wanted to eliminate Morrow, but his anger was prevented by Letitia, who came to hug him from behind. Letitia had had enough of the revenge that Albin had done for her. If it were any more, Letitia feared Albin's soul would be dirty. Albin fell silent. He looked at his girl. Alicia also looked back at her fiancé and thanked Albin. Albin had represented Letitia in getting angry. Crayon watched the Audrin couple's behavior and cracked a thin smile. He then announced that the duel had been won by Albin Audrin. Albin wasn't overly happy, but as long as Letitia was satisfied, he was willing. Letitia suddenly praised the two of them for their acting. She thought Letitia and Albin might make a perfect couple. Hearing this, Albin's face lit up with joy. He agreed with Letitia's words and was confident that the two would make the best couple. Letitia continued, stating that they could be a pair of evil women and a great villain. From then on, they declared themselves the most evil couple, with the motto of evil for evil. A month has passed since the duel against Morrow ended. Albin is now extremely nervous because he will face a major event in his life. Not a war or another duel, but his wedding. Albin seems unable to hide his nervousness. even though Seabass has advised his young master that such an attitude is unbecoming of a groom. The wedding ceremony was a suggestion from Letitia, which Albin immediately agreed to. Albin himself did not believe that his nervousness about getting married was greater than when he first fought a goblin. Seabass responded to Albin's nervousness by saying that his feelings are a good thing because the wedding ceremony is a special place for the bride and groom to celebrate the gateway to their new life. Therefore, at least Albin must maintain his dignity on his wedding day so that Letitia will not be disappointed. Hearing the name of his future wife called made Albin refocus. The young man was very impatient to see Letitia's appearance in her wedding dress. Seeing how Albin behaved at that time made Seabass remember Albin's father, who was also very panicked before the wedding ceremony. Even the words that Albin's father said were the same as what Albin had just said. Seabass felt nostalgic for that day. Albin didn't really understand because he himself didn't really remember his parents. Both of Albin's parents had passed away before Albin could even understand. That nostalgic moment was only Seabass who felt. The old servant felt very proud to be able to accompany the Audron family wedding for 2 generations. Albin felt quite honored when he heard Seabass say that, but for Albin, Seabass's existence itself was like his own father. Seabass's feelings were filled with joy and emotion upon hearing these words from Albin, his young master, whom he had cared for since he was a naughty boy. The old butler felt his efforts had been worthwhile. Albin was pleased, though he was also a little taken aback when Seabass mentioned his dark past as a naughty boy. The time for the wedding ceremony was drawing near. They had to hurry to the venue. Elsewhere, Letitia was still being prepared by her maids as best as they could. Compared to Albin, Letitia seemed calmer and not at all nervous, even though the wedding ceremony was before her eyes. The girl's nervousness had subsided because the Baron Audron family was truly filled with only good people. None of Letitia's relatives or close family attended the wedding ceremony, so that's why everyone was so attentive to Letitia and didn't leave the girl alone. Even so, Letitia also felt nervous, even more nervous than when she faced the engagement with Morrow. At that time, Letitia was just beginning to understand that she, too, could feel nervous because she would be tied to someone she truly loved from the bottom of her heart. Letitia still felt anxious about the future and feared whether she would be able to build a good husband-wife relationship with Albin from then on. But these feelings were overcome by the overflowing joy she felt at that moment. Letitia felt like she was now a completely new person. Seabass came to the front door to pick her up for the veil-down ceremony. Letitia got up from her chair. The girl walked confidently and confidently. She felt that it was okay for her to be different from her usual self, at least for that day. Albin had been waiting for the bride's arrival in front of the wedding altar. His nerves were getting more and more intense. He even felt like a bird might come out of his mouth at that moment. To calm his nerves, Albin chose to recall the order of the wedding events that he would do that day. When the ceremony began, first Seabass and Letitia would walk down the altar on Virgin Road. After that, Albin would do the veil up, then say his vows and exchange rings with Letitia. The veil up was one of the most thrilling moments for Albin at this time. Albin had felt that his wedding ceremony was too complicated, detailed, and troublesome to the point of making him annoyed. But his annoyance immediately disappeared when it was announced that the bride and Seabass were starting to enter the room. Albin immediately turned his head, seeing Letitia walking slowly down Virgin Road. Letitia's appearance was very beautiful, even though her face was still covered by a veil. Albin even compared Letitia's appearance this time to equivalent of a goddess who had descended from heaven. Arriving in front of the altar, Seabass then gave Letitia to his young master. Albin took Letitia's hand and led her closer to the wedding altar. Albin froze, looking at Letitia until the girl thought there might be something wrong with her makeup. She asked Albin. The young man could only answer that he was so captivated by Letitia's beauty. Letitia blushed. Her face turned red, and she averted her gaze from Albin spontaneously in response. She accepted Albin's words as a polite compliment. Letitia seemed very happy to receive the compliment. The ceremony began, and the bride and groom exchanged vows in front of the priest and all the attendees. The two vowed with such confidence and happiness that they would protect, accept, and love each other until death do them part. After the vows, it was the turn of the ring exchange. Albin took his wife's hand, but Letitia looked trembling. Albin asked why. In fact, Letitia was worried. The girl doubted whether a fallen noble girl like her deserved to be happy. Albin answered the question directly. Letitia really deserved to be happy. Albin would make his wife happy, very happy, even the happiest in the whole world. That was Albin's promise, their promise at the wedding. Letitia's ring was on. Now it was Albin's turn to receive the ring from Letitia. The girl felt very happy. For her, perhaps that moment was the happiest moment of her entire life. Not only Letitia, but Albin was the same. However, according to the young man, it was still too early to decide that moment was the happiest. They still had a long future. There were still many moments they had not experienced together. From that day on, Albin promised that he would make Letitia feel happiest many times. Therefore, their wedding moment was only the beginning. Hearing Albin's sweet promise made Letitia cry with emotion. If that moment was only the beginning, then there would be so many happy moments that might make them confused to determine which was the happiest moment. They would not be able to determine until they grew old together. Their happiness would continue to grow. Seeing Letitia smile made Albin sure that his wife was more worthy of smiling happily. To protect Letitia's smile, Albin was willing to do anything. Albin Audrey and Letitia Audrey were now officially husband and wife. They were a charming couple. At least that's what Uda Crayon thought. Crayon recommended Albin and Letitia to the headmaster of the Royal Academy. Although Crayon was credible enough to recommend them, some were still skeptical because Albin and Letitia were surrounded by negative rumors. As the headmaster of the Magdala Familia Royal Academy, Faust Melchizedek had to be selective and couldn't accept just anyone into the academy, even through recommendations. Therefore, Faust proposed holding a special entrance exam for Albin and Letitia. Albin and Letitia were preparing for a lengthy trip away from the Audrey territory, about 3 years in the making. It wasn't a honeymoon, as they were newlyweds, but rather a royal academy to qualify for nobility. The maids were having a hard time letting Letitia go. Letitia tried to reassure the loyal Audrey servants. She also reminded them that as servants of the Audrey family, the maids were to take good care of the Audrey mansion. Letitia, Albin's wife, was firm yet very kind and charming. No maid could stand Letitia. It even made Albin proud of himself as the head of the family. Albin was about to depart. Seabass advised his young master to be careful at the academy. But Seabass needn't worry because the person who had taught Albin was Seabass himself. His abilities were unquestionable. When they arrived at the academy, Letitia and Albin were already waiting for them. The two had to separate, and Albin would immediately begin preparing for the test. Letitia was confused about what the academy meant by the test for Albin. Albin told her not to worry. Regarding the test, Albin was certain it was the work of Duke Moro's family, who still wanted to cause trouble with him. Albin was still willing to put up with the boring charade. At the place where Albin's test was held, an examiner was waiting for him, feeling annoyed because of the wait. The examiner seemed to have accepted a large bribe from the Bertori family just for the task of trapping Albin Audrey. The examiner who would test Albin was Bastian. Albin, who arrived there, showed a tired and annoyed facial expression, and this made Bastian even more furious, wanting to throw a humiliating failure in Albin's face. Albin had just wanted to greet his prospective teacher, but before he finished his greeting, Bastian immediately cut Albin's words with insults. Bastian shouted, saying that Albin came late, and even made him wait. He called Albin a person who had no intention of entering the academy. Bastian thought that if Albin, a young man with an arrogant attitude, was threatened, Albin should be afraid, but Bastian's thoughts were wrong. With a slight laugh, Albin replied that his arrival was not late. Even in this case, the academy was arbitrarily waiting for Albin, not according to the promised schedule. Bastian became even more furious when he heard Albin's answer, which did not seem to have the slightest sense of guilt or hesitation. The man then immediately began the test and pointed to a target that would be Albin's benchmark. Albin was asked to fire magic at the target. Bastian assumed the test would definitely fail Albin, as magic was something that could only be learned after entering the academy. However, Bastian was mistaken once again. Albin confidently fired magic at the designated target. What further astonished Bastian was that the magic Albin used was a combined spell that even Bastian couldn't activate. Albin laughed inwardly, feeling proud because the magic he had just activated was the result of his intensive training with Seabass for the past half-year, because not only the swordsmanship he had learned at that time, but magic had been taught to Albin by Seabass many times. Albin smiled slyly, asking Bastian if he passed, but the annoyed examiner threw a wooden sword at Albin. They immediately moved on to the next test, which was a sparring match. Albin would pass if he could get 1 point from Bastion. Albin was a little doubtful about the test because he thought defeating a teacher before even entering the academy was a very arrogant act. Bastion didn't care. He just needed to defeat Albin right then and there. Bastion rushed forward and attacked Albin with his sword. Albin simply stood there, blocking all of Bastion's attacks with just one hand. Bastion refused to accept being underestimated and called Albin a damn brat. Albin was at his wit's end. The prospective Magdala Royal Academy student immediately raised his sword and sent Bastion's sword flying high into the sky. With his wooden sword, Albin struck Bastion's head, causing Bastion to fall, and the wooden sword Albin was using broke. Albin approached Bastion and whispered to his examiner. He called Bastion a weak, incompetent little fellow. Albin offered to take the test with a real sword or a magic contest. The young man began to display his cruel, entertainment-obsessed demeanor. His behavior was halted by the arrival of the head of the Magdala Familia Royal Academy, Faust. Albin learned that Faust, in addition to being the head of the Magdala Familia Royal Academy, was also one of the legendary mages from the Kingdom of Valland. Faust meets Albin. Albin is surprised how the great magician knew of his existence. Faust learns that Albin is from the Baron Audron family because of a recommendation from Crayon, who described Albin as a rare talent that only appears once every 100 years. Bastion interrupts Faust and denounces Albin for harming the examiner, and he deserves punishment. However, Faust already knows the truth. Incompetent people are not needed at the Magdala Familia Royal Academy. Bastion is immediately dismissed from his teaching position at the academy. Albin smiled as he watched Bastion lament his fate. Faust also informed Albin that the young man had passed and been accepted as a student at the Magdala Familia Royal Academy. Albin accepted the news calmly. Seeing this attitude, Faust praised Albin but also gave him one piece of advice: to be more restrained and not to play around with the teachers more than necessary. Faust wanted Albin to realize his position as just a student at the Magdala Familia Royal Academy. Soon after, Faust left Albin's presence. On Albin's first day at the academy, he received a lecture from the principal. Albin realized that the principal knew what he had done was inappropriate, but he still let him pass. This made Albin even more wary, and he would start being careful not to overreact in the future. Albin headed towards the boys' dormitory, but Faust told him he was going in the wrong direction. The young man, along with one other student, had been assigned to a separate building. Albin didn't know what the principal meant, but he could only go and obey. The young man seemed quite enthusiastic to find out what kind of person his roommate would be. When he arrived at what would be his room for the next 3 years, Albin entered and saw Letitia sitting there enjoying a cup of tea. Spontaneously, Albin told Letitia that it wasn't the girls' dormitory, but that she also had a reason for being there. Letitia had been deliberately directed there from the start. She was also suddenly informed that the decision was an order from the principal. Albin's initially beaming expression suddenly turned worried. If he shared a room with Letitia, Albin was sure something would happen. The young man even interpreted the principal's order as an assignment for Albin to produce an heir for the Audron family before they graduated from the academy. Albin rushed to tell the principal so they could have separate rooms, but Letitia held him back. Albin couldn't refuse Letitia's wishes, but he still wanted to ensure there was a partition between their beds. Hearing this, Letitia was a little disappointed because the girl thought sharing a bed with her husband would be enough. It seemed that teasing Albin had become a new hobby for Letitia. Elsewhere, Faust is playing chess with Crayon. Faust reveals that the old man was honestly skeptical and even thought Crayon was crazy for recommending Albin Audron. Now Faust understands what Crayon meant because he has seen firsthand the rare talent that Albin possesses. Although he seems to have unlimited talent, Albin seems to harbor a demon in his heart. From Faust's observations, Albin seems unable to restrain himself from destroying his opponents. Albin is a very strong, noble figure and not complacent with his own talent, so this quality makes Albin a merciless figure. That is why Faust places Albin in the same room as Letitia. Faust's decision was also influenced by Crayon's words that if Albin was a vessel for a tyrant, then Letitia was a vessel for a wise king. They were very confident that Letitia would be an indispensable woman for Baron Albin Audron. Both Faust and Crayon seemed impatient to see the future development of the Audron couple. Besides discussing the Baron Audron couple, they also discussed the new school rules that would be implemented starting that year. They also did not question Bastion's unilateral dismissal because Bastian had been known to accept bribes. Bastian, who was mentally disturbed, almost raped a woman he accidentally saw on the street. The woman was saved by a young man. Bastian, who was beaten unconscious, muttered Alban's name in his annoyance. The young man then remembered Alban's name because of Bastian. In the early days of Alban and Letitia's time as academy students, the two of them had become the topic of conversation throughout the academy. Alban didn't care. Even that morning, the students were talking about him getting a teacher fired on Alban's first day at the Magdala Familia Academy. Alban didn't care because he was waiting for Letitia, who had excused herself to go to the restroom but never returned. Alban went to catch up with Letitia. He was worried that his wife would be harassed, and sure enough, not far from there, he found Letitia surrounded by several female students who were speaking harshly about Letitia. Alban was about to intervene to help his wife, but he was shocked by Letitia's response, who could answer the insults and harsh words uttered by several female students with equally sarcastic sentences. The female students felt displeased with Letitia's words. Feeling insulted, one of them almost slapped Letitia in the face. Alban was about to intervene, but suddenly, Letitia was saved by a young man who appeared and blocked the girl's slap. Seeing a handsome young man help his wife made Alban jealous. The young man was just passing by and couldn't let the bullying happen right before his eyes. Letitia thanked the young man who had helped her. Alban immediately stepped forward and pulled Letitia back towards him. Alban thanked the gentle young man who had saved his wife, but also warned the young man not to get any closer to Letitia. Letitia was surprised by Alban's sudden appearance. The young man was also surprised and awkward when he learned that the girl he helped was already married. The young man asked, suspecting the couple before him were the Audrins. Alban confirmed this. The young man then enthusiastically explained that Letitia, Alban's wife, had become a hot topic even among the common people. The young man introduced himself as Leonil Hylant. Alban accepted his handshake, and he also shook Leonil's hand on Letitia's behalf. After that, they parted ways. Alban walked down the hallway with Letitia. His face was mortified. Letitia knew that Alban was thinking of a way to expel Leonil from the academy. Alban was surprised that Letitia could read what was going on in his mind. The girl felt that she definitely knew because Letitia was Alban's wife. Letitia told Alban that her husband didn't need to worry. Letitia wouldn't be interested in Leo, and Alban didn't need to expel Leonil. Letitia wanted Alban to stop showing his gloomy expression. Alban smiled awkwardly. His wife's words were true. They should be able to get along with the other students. Alban and Letitia arrived at their classroom. Alban opened the door and entered. Unexpectedly, they were in the same class as Leonil. Leonil seemed happy, but his interaction disturbed another girl in the class. A group of students was already in the classroom. Shortly after, their homeroom teacher, Mrs. Paula Velvet, arrived and began class. The atmosphere in the classroom seemed less lively. As Paula was about to begin, a student named Ivan Scottish, from the Duke Scottish family, asked why his class was filled with a bunch of people with mixed titles and ranks. The question was indirectly interpreted as a demeaning insult by one of the students sitting by the window of the classroom. Ivan did not feel that his question was wrong. The student sitting by the window then reminded Ivan of the principal's words during the entrance ceremony, where Faust said, "While at the academy, forget about social class." Ivan did not care about the principal's message and felt that it had nothing to do with him. Ivan even called the student who reprimanded him a commoner who did not realize that the place was too classy for someone like him. A quiet girl among them seemed to tremble with fear. Mrs. Paula spoke up. She said there was something she wanted all of her students to do. Mrs. Paula told her about a new school rule that had started that year. The rule stated that one person from her class had to be the king who would rule the class. Mrs. Paula wanted the students in her class at that time to decide who would be the king. They were quite confused about the king in question. Mrs. Paula didn't explain in detail, but only said that if one student became king, then the other 9 people would be losers who had to swear to obey the king completely until graduation day arrived. Ivan was the first student to protest, having never heard of such a rule being implemented at the Magdala Familia Academy. Of course, no other student had heard of it, as the rule regarding the king was a new one implemented that year. One of the other students then asked, if there must be a king, how would they determine who would occupy that position? Mrs. Paula didn't want to be bothered, so she left all the decisions to her students. Her students were allowed to compete academically and physically, even through discussion, violence, or money. Any means were allowed except murder, as the penalty for this was dropping out of school. Finally, Mrs. Paula advised her students to use everything they had honed so far and put aside the others. The student who had reprimanded Ivan, who was the owner of seat number 6, named Roan Stelasian, proposed a one-on-one duel so that the student who could survive until the end would be considered worthy of becoming king. A student who owned seat number 2, named Estelle Applebury, argued that a king should be elegant and graceful. A quiet girl who occupied seat number 1, named Shano Agrain, preferred that her classmates not fight. Another student who occupied seat number 4, named Matthias Wolf, wanted his classmates to submit to him, who was the number 1 richest person who should rule the world. Matthias believed that wealth and natural law were appropriate to be applied in determining who the king was. One other girl from the class did not mind who became the king. The girl occupied seat number 5, named Lucky Azalea. The masked girl who did not speak and occupied seat number 7, named Carla Rexon. Seat number 8 was occupied by Leonil Hylant. Albin himself occupied seat number 9, while Letitia occupied seat number 10. Lastly, Ivan Scottus, the owner of seat number 3, felt that all the students in the class were mere lowly humans. Ivan believed that a king should have dignity. Speaking of prestige, Matthias said that in that class, Letitia had a higher prestige than Ivan. Letitia didn't want to be king. She wanted to recommend someone else to be king, and according to her, that person was her husband, Albin Audrin. Everyone was shocked. Even Albin himself was no less shocked. Leonil suggested determining the temporary king by seeing who was the strongest in the class, but Letitia didn't care. Whatever the classification, it had nothing to do with Letitia's choice. The girl had already chosen the absolute way that her king was Albin. Letitia even dared to say that no one would be able to win against Albin just by numbers. Indirectly, Letitia had used Albin as a target for duels by her classmates, who in turn himself was actually very lazy to do things like being a king or anything like that.